Hey, everything about the yield curve explained in a couple of minutes. Why is the yield curve so powerful? Can it predict recessions? Yes. This is what a normal yield curve looks like in a healthy economy, where longer term interest rates, or this would imply that longer term interest rates are yielding more than shorter term interest rates. A inverted yield curve only happens in the unhealthy economy, normally right before economic downturns. This would imply that shorter term interest rates are yielding more than longer term interest rates. So to start off with, let's discuss some basics regarding the bond market as far as duration goes. A bill is 4 weeks to 52 weeks in duration. A note is 1 year to 10 years in duration. A bond is 10 years to 30 years in duration. The yield curve is simply taking a longer term interest rate minus a shorter term interest rate. For an example, the 10 year minus the 2 year is the most common yield curve spread. That would take us to this right here, which is this. This is the 10 year minus the 2 year yield curve spread. Anything below this horizontal line right here, where I have my cursor, would be below neutral delta, meaning it's inverted. Anything above is a re-steepened yield curve. Okay. And then we have the 10 year minus the 3 month, which is this one. It's the most accurate one. Uh, and the 10 year, 2 year is the most common one. Then you have the near term forward spread, which is the one that the Fed looks at, which is this one. And just to bring it up regarding what Jerome Powell said, Jerome Powell, look at near term. Yeah, here. Powell says look at short term treasury yield curve for recession risk. Okay, so he's talking about the near term forward spread. All right, this one. Uh, all right. So when the yield curve inverts, it means that the short-term interest rate is yielding more on an annualized basis than the longer-term interest rates, meaning that the curve goes below neutral delta of zero. Why is that a problem? Because of a couple of reasons. Because it hurts banks. That's the first reason. The way banks make money is by borrowing money short-term and lending it out long-term. So this hurts their business model. Number two, you should be compensated for lending your money out for a long period of time rather than a short period of time, as there is inflation risk and you may not be paid back. Number three, it signals that the wealthiest people in the world are moving their counterparty risk from for example, the banking system to the government, as the banks can fail, but the government cannot. Moving the counterparty risk from the banks to the government? Question mark. My deposits are safe, right? No. The US banking system is 22.3 trillion, and the FDIC can only cover up to half of that. So what I mean by that is this. If you Google how much money is in the US banking system, by the end of 2022, banks in the US own a combined of $22.3 trillion in assets. The problem with that is this is from the FDIC website. So when you hear, oh, well, my money is insured up to 250K per bank, right? Right, but that's only up to half a percent of the US banking system's deposits, right? As of June 30th, 2023, the balance sheet stood at 117 billion. Okay, so that's all you had, right, for the FDIC. So going back to the yield curve, a healthy looking yield curve is upward sloping, longer, which means that longer term interest rates yield more than shorter term interest rates. A flattening out of the yield curve is when they're yielding about the same. A inversion of the yield curve is when the short-term interest rates yield more than long-term interest rates. This has predicted every single recession since World War II with zero false positives. Well, what about the mid-1960s, some people ask? That was a false signal, right? Not really. While the unemployment rate didn't necessarily rise, it did lead to a mini recession, as Milton Friedman said, due to the credit crunch in 1967. So if we go to this link right here, it leads us to this. A yield curve inversion in 1966 was not followed by recession, so you could argue that this is the only false positive. It would not be out of place, though, to mention that the credit crunch of 1967 has sometimes been described as a mini recession, notably by Milton Friedman. So the yield curve inversion of 1966 may not be therefore be so false of a positive as it seems. So why does the yield curve invert? It inverts because the smartest money in the world and the wealthiest people are inverting it by getting into the most safe and liquid asset in the world, the 10-year treasury. What happens when they buy the 10-year treasury? It pushes the price up on the treasury or off the treasury, and the yield goes down. There's an inverse correlation between the price and the yield. Okay? There's inverse correlation between the price and the yield on the treasury. This leads to inversion in the yield curve. The bond market's market cap is somewhere around 130 to 150 trillion, which is 2.5 to 3 times the size of the US stock market. How can it come out of inversion? There's two ways. Number one is the bull steepener. This usually happens when short-term interest rates decline faster than long-term interest rates, usually due to a crisis when the Fed, which is when the Fed drops interest rates at, on the front end of the yield curve in response to a recession or economic downturn, and they normally follow more specifically the two-year yield, right? Which is why we look at the 10-year, two-year spread, because the two-year yield leads Fed funds, and the Fed funds rate is the overnight lending rate. Okay. It's called bull steepening because it's bullish for bonds but bearish for the economy and the stock market. People think of it as if interest rates are coming down, that's great because it means that it's cheaper to borrow money. The problem with that is that the banks only care about risk and reward and they will not lend into a risky environment. They look at the yield curve and see that there's too much risk and they simply will not take that risk at that time. Number two is the bear steepener. This happens when long-term interest rates rise faster than short-term interest rates, usually due to growth in inflationary expectations or soft landing in the economy is strong. Keep in mind, by the way, that the long end of the yield curve is more so linked to growth and inflation expectations. Okay, it's called bear steepening because it's bearish for the bond prices but bullish for the stock market and the economy, as once again it signals that there's growth and inflationary expectations. Which one happens every single time? Every single business cycle. A bull steepener. We've never had a bear steepener in the yield curve, as in the uninverting or the re-steepening above neutral delta. So every single time we see a bull steepener. All right, that's all I wanted to go over in this video. Take care, peace.